You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The views expressed by the individuals during this broadcast are their own opinions, and they may not be the same as those of their group or other organizations they may be involved with.
All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our V.A.C. Roundtable. We're up to number 56 now, and we're joined for a second time by a very special guest. Of course, Alice O'Leary Randall has joined us again, and this time she wants to share with us on a passion project that she has taken on, and needless to say, is something that many of us support for the simple fact that Alice's work predates a lot of the modern cannabis movement. And of course, that of course is great for the years of work. However, with the bringing forth of the internet, etc., a lot of the information when, her and Bob were very active, as stated, was mostly in newspapers and articles such as that. So Alice has taken it upon herself to digitize the history. And on top of that history, of course, I talk Proposition 215 and others because that's the law here in California that has allowed my existence in the medical cannabis field. However, I was an activist in the early 90s, and I heard, as well as traveled around the country through 47 states, and learned about the individual states and their laws. And needless to say, there was a lot of change attempted back in the 70s, especially because of how the Controlled Substances Act went after cannabis, etc., which made it, needless to say, a challenge for those who were trying to gain medical access or even have that discussion. It had to be very challenging back when Alice was starting out because of how draconian things were. Nixon had escalated the war on drugs, and America was going through its own cultural change. So I'd like to thank Alice, and of course, on her Project 50. Of course, we titled it, this particular one, The Early Days of Medical Cannabis Movement, 76 to 96, although she has her own title for it. So I'll let her get into that. But first off, thank you for joining us, Alice. And please give us an introduction about what Project 50 is.
Well, thank you, Eddie. And it's a pleasure to be here and to have an opportunity to talk again to the veterans. And you're right. This is a passion project for me that I've engaged on. It sort of started to circulate in my head back during COVID. I was doing some work, and I tried to find a copy of the original decision in my husband's 1976 case, U.S. v. Randall. And I didn't seem to have one in the house. I've moved a couple of times in the last few years, and things are a mess. So I figured, no problem. I'll just go online and I'll be able to find that easily. Well, I couldn't find it. And I found one copy that was not in the best of shape. And of course, it was available in Lexus and behind paywalls. But, that really bothered me because U.S. v. Randall, it was a precedent-setting case. It established the concept of medical necessity. And of course, it opened the doors for Robert to start using marijuana legally. That was through a separate petitioning process. But the decision in the trial and the petition being okay all kind of came together in one moment and created the medical marijuana movement in 1976. And I realized while searching and not being able to find this decision that all of the work that Bob and I had done for 20 years was analog. It was all stuck on newsprint. It was all on audio tape that was disintegrating in people's basements, and my own included. And I started to put together this idea of a project. I realized that 2026 will be the 50th anniversary of Robert obtaining legal access to marijuana. So I decided to call it Project 50, celebrating the early history of the medical cannabis movement, 1976 to 1996. I don't expect to be able to digitize everything, but my goal is to digitize enough and to put it out there in various places. I'm doing monthly or every 2 months or so press releases, info releases, actually, more than press releases. I put one out today concerning the 1978 state of Florida was the second state in the country to enact a marijuana as medicine law. And a lot of people have forgotten that 45 years ago. And of course, Florida doesn't get a lot of good reviews these days, but in 1978, that was a moment. That was a great moment. And so I'll be doing things like that, little newsletters, essentially going out, reminding people of what the history is. And meanwhile, back at the ranch, I'm digitizing news clippings. We're uploading videos into YouTube and other outlets. And I'm talking to the folks at Internet Archive, which I hope a lot of you are familiar with. It's one of my favorite places to go to. It's already got a lot of great marijuana books that are scanned and that are available to check out and to read, that books that are out of print. Our own book, the book that Bob and I wrote, Marijuana RX, The Patient's Fight from Medicinal Pot, has been scanned and is available through the Internet Archive. And so I'm talking to them about finding a permanent archive home for all of these things. So I'm excited about it, and I'm really excited about the reaction of people. You know, I've been making the joke that it's exciting to have breaking news that's 50 years old, and that's essentially what I've got. I tell people, hey, did you know New Mexico was the first state to pass a marijuana as medicine law? And they go, oh, no, it was California in 1996. And I go, no, it was New Mexico in 1978. And that was lobbied, by the way, by a veteran, Lynn Pearson. And so, you know, I'm anxious to keep alive the memory of these people who worked so hard and very often gave the last good days of their lives to see that the reform to reform the marijuana prohibition and to make it legal for medical purposes. So I'm excited, and I feel like I'm hanging out with a lot of old friends these days. So.
Well, thank you. Needless to say, it's very much needed, and I am glad that you have taken this on, because it is very important for people to understand, because oddly enough, Alice, majority of the younger generations here in California don't even know what Proposition 215 is. So the need for your digitization, needless to say, for the earlier history is very much needed. I'm very happy to hear that you're working with the Internet Archives, because it should be, and the work of all these great activists, including yourself, that spearheaded, you're the giant shoulders we stand upon currently. So anything that we can embolden ourselves with historically to enable the younger generations to realize the long road that it has been is well worth that journey. So I can't thank you enough for embarking on it, and I look forward to seeing as and where this goes. I think Michael Krause has a follow-up real quick.
Thank you. So great to see you, Alice.
Likewise.
I have just a very quick follow-up. Kenzie reminded me just the other night that the very first Park Davis flyer for the Cannabis Americana product is about circa 1900, really beautiful multicolor lithograph flyer with the picture, the botanical picture of cannabis and everything on it, very proudly talking about cannabis americana pharmaceutical product in over 120 years ago. That's on file at the Internet Archive. I forgot that we did that, but I had written an article about it with Dr. Mikaria, and that was enshrined in O'Shaughnessy's, and then I think Fred also published it in a couple other places. Very proud to be part of that, and yeah, I just wanted to mention that. It'll plug for the Internet Archive, I guess. Thanks.
Yeah, great. It's a great organization, truly.
Yes, maintaining the history pre-internet is important because a lot of the younger generation think it all existed, and needless to say, we're that generations that realize that's not a fact. Next up will be Council Member Wade Laughter for the next question. Council Member Laughter.
Thank you, Chen. Alice, I really want to appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. So much respect for what you and Robert did for those of us who need cannabis in our life today. This Project 50, I'm fascinated. What's your vision for how this might look going forward? Because I think, to your point that you were making right there at the end, most of the folks who lived this history are either no longer with us or in that transition. And meantime, none of it's easily accessible history. So would you speak about that, please? What your vision for how this might look going forward?
Well, it's a tough question for me, Wade, because first of all, I've made this in my mind. I've made this a 3-year project. I'm 75 years old, and the writing's on the wall, and I feel time running out, and so I'm kind of trying to approach things in small chunks, and if I can get what I want done, and by 2026, and I still have the energy to go forward, which I hope I do, we'll see what happens then. There's a couple of things that I'm working on. For example, the book that Bob and I wrote, Marijuana RX, The Patient's Fight for Medicinal Pot, came out in 1998. The Kindle did not come out until 2007, which was the year the publisher of our book went out of business. So as a result, we do not have a Kindle version of Marijuana RX. And I've been working on that. I've been saying for a number of years, I've tried to interest publishers in it. I've known in my heart this needed to be done. And so I've been working on that. I hope to get that out. And I think, with the modern technology, with being able to put in all the digital links, you talk about Lynn Pearson in New Mexico, and you can give people a link to the law that got passed. You can put video up, if I can ever wake them up at the TV stations in Albuquerque. But I hope to get video of Lynn that I can put up somewhere. And, so all of these things, I think, are going to generate kind of lives of their own. And who knows where that will lead. I must say, I'm really grateful and excited about the interest in this project. It's a lot more than what I expected, and that's very gratifying. So who knows what the future will bring, Wade? Our hope is we're in it, but we'll just have to see how that goes.
No, I love your approach of one thing at a time, doing what you can when you can, see how it unfolds. I think of it not unlike planting seeds, Alice.
Not unlike
some seeds. Thank you.
Yeah, I think of it as pebbles in the pond, and the ripples just keep going out. You don't know how far they go out. You don't know who they reach, but they keep going out. And I've certainly learned that in these 40 plus years.
Well, it's an honor, needless to say, and we'll do what we can to also help continue your word as well. As you release these things, we'll be more than happy to share them with others so that they can gain the understanding and the depth of understanding that is needed, because it was countless lives that led to the change that we are experiencing today. And unfortunately, these names have been forgotten to time, and it is important that they are remembered. And especially coming from somebody who rode the integrity train with them all, it's an honor, needless to say. So next up, I have Nate Landau with the next question. Councilmember Landau.
Hey, I first really want to thank you for doing this project. When I was in Vienna with Michael Crowley, I was talking to him about this thing, and how amazing it is. I'm only not even 38, so I'm a newcomer to this industry, this movement, and I want to learn more about it. So I really thank you for it. And my question is, can you tell us how Manorol came into existence?
Oh, yes. I'd love to tell you how Marinol came into existence. That is a great story right there. So in 1978, of course, Robert got his marijuana in 76. That started the ball rolling. And, you know, they gave him the marijuana and they sort of expected him to go away and not say anything. But this was a man who was trained in speech and rhetoric and who had a master's degree in rhetoric, and that's the art of persuasion. I mean, you couldn't have cherry picked a better person, and he wasn't about to be quiet. And so all through 1977, and he was out on the road, ginning up support, if you will, and people were very interested in this. At the time, particularly cancer patients, cancer chemo was. I know it's still very difficult. I understand that, but in the 70s, in the early 70s into the mid 70s, it was brutal. And it was torturous almost. And the vomiting that people would experience was quite intense. And so cancer patients heard that this might happen and that cannabis might help them. And they were very interested in that. And that really gave us a lot of momentum. We had a lot of cancer patients coming to the movement. And when New Mexico passed their law in 1978, and as I've previously said, Lynn Pearson was the lobbyist there, and he was a cancer patient, that just lit the wildfire even more. That was in February of 1978. In June of 1978, you had Florida that passed almost an identical bill. A month later, you had Louisiana that passed almost an identical bill. In September, you had Illinois that passed a bill. And the federal government, the drug agencies, were just caught totally flat-footed. You know, there's no other word for it. They were in a panic mode because they could see that this was gaining a lot of momentum. When we went into 1979, we picked up another 11 states that passed the New Mexico-style Controlled Substances Therapeutic Research Act, which would have allowed people within the state with glaucoma and cancer to use marijuana that was supposed to be provided by the federal government, because the federal government had told the states that was the only way they could do these programs. So all of these states enacted these laws. You had a lot of cancer patients lobbying for passage of the laws. There was just a tremendous amount of momentum. And the federal government thought they had an ace in the hole. It was a drug made by Eli Lilly. It was called Nabilone. And Nabilone was in, I think, stage 2, perhaps early stage 3 testing. And you know, this is really a curious time to be looking back at all of those things, because the perspective I have is entirely different than when I was living it. And I'm reading these memos now, and I can almost feel the panic that's being quelled down by this thought that it's okay. We have Eli Lilly, and they're going to release this. We're going to approve this drug called Nabilone. It's good for cancer chemotherapy patients. That will take the wind out of the sail, and everything will be fine. And then the beagle dogs started to die. In the long-term research project with Nabilone, beagle dogs that had been given the drug for, I think, 120 days or something like that, suddenly started to seize up and die. Well, now Eli Lilly did the honest and what's the word? They did the right thing. They said, okay, we're pulling this drug. We need to go back to the drawing board, and we're not doing any more studies for a while. Nabilone, by the way, went on to become Sesamet and is available in Canada and several other countries, and I think it's prescribable here in America as well. They worked out that a dog's physiology is different than humans, and that's what caused the problem. But at this point in time, in 1978, Nabilone was DOA, it was gone. And so suddenly the feds had all of these state laws, had all of these states saying, hey, we've got this law, we want your federal marijuana. You know, we're gonna need, I don't know, thousands of marijuana cigarettes. Well, the federal government didn't have thousands of marijuana cigarettes. They have a pokey little farm down in the University of Mississippi that they like to call a pot plantation, but it's puny. I mean, it's just pathetic. And so they were back into panic mode again. And so they did the only thing that they could do. They turned to synthetic THC that had been used for research, primarily animal research. And they went to the NCI with it, National Cancer Institute, and they said, we want you to release this drug through your Group C program. Now, the Group C program was one that National Cancer Institute had to facilitate the release of promising drugs that had been through all of the testing process, but hadn't quite gone through all of the administrative stuff that FDA demands. You know, they hadn't dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's yet, but they were safe drugs. And NCI didn't like the idea initially of releasing Delta-9 THC. There were a couple of memos that said it wasn't, that this Delta-9 THC wasn't formulated properly, that when it was used by humans, it was erratic. It could have very bad side effects in humans, and NCI really pushed back for quite a few months, but finally the agencies, FDA, NIDA, and DEA all pushed back, and NCI said, okay, we'll release Delta-9 THC. And when they did so, the headlines of the time were astonishing because it was always pot pill released. And every federal official that had a quote in these newspaper articles would talk about this pill. It's just like pot. It's a pot pill. I mean, the advertising was so false and so bogus, but it released through the NCI program. Several 100,000 pills were distributed over about a 4-year period, I think. And by then, FDA had found a company in New Jersey by the name of Unimed. And Unimed agreed to take over manufacturing the Delta-9 THC pills. They agreed to go through the process of filling out all of the paperwork, doing all the administrative, the NDA, the new drug application. They agreed to do that. Poor souls, I think they thought it would just be like a 6 or 9 month process. And it took Unimed several years to get final approval from the federal government. But when they did, one part of that process was to rename it, and they renamed it Marinol. And so that is how Marinol came into our lives. Now, Unimed, as I understand it, did reformulate it slightly so that it was a slightly better formulation, but we all know that Marinol is still erratic. It's still not the best drug. It seems the best results are being achieved through very small dosing of Marinol. And they're doing very interesting things in Europe with Marinol in small, almost micro dosing. But at the time, we didn't know anything about that. But that's how Marinol came into our lives. And it did, the release of the Delta-9 THC through Group C did take the wind out of our sails as far as the medical marijuana movement was concerned. This was in 1981 that they finally did the release through NCI. And for the next 7 or 8 years, there wasn't much happening. The federal government called up all the states that had all of these marijuana is medicine law. They said, well, we don't have real marijuana. You can take these pills or you don't get nothing at all. And the states just kind of went, yeah, oh, well, okay. And that was that. So it's an interesting story. Not many people know about it. And it's just one chapter in this whole process of bringing cannabis to the market that needs to be retained.
Well, they didn't know about it now. Well, they know now, which is why I want to have this discussion so that they can get educated and understand the depth of the history. And yes, needless to say, that's a very succinct and very nice timeline followed. And of course, to actually ride that roller coaster had to absolutely suck. You know, I can't imagine, but because roller coaster is considered to be fun rides, but this one could not have been in any way, shape, or form, because you're dealing with the love of your life, his health, and all of that. So the stakes were beyond high. It was your life, and people forget that it was people challenged with their backs against the wall that push back for the change. And
Yes.
I can't thank you enough for being one of those catalysts, because we needed you. Michael Crowitz, you have our next question, sir.
Thank you, Etienne. So, Alice, I'm particularly interested in my historical work that I do in the path of rediscovery. Of course, William O'Shaughnessy put a journal article out like in 1850 that basically started the discussion of medical cannabis in the United States. O'Shaughnessy, brought the ancient wisdom of India, to our shores, and we ran from there. He ran with it from there. But that history got lost. In 1941, cannabis was removed from the pharmacopoeia and the formulary. By the time, my dad, was setting up a business and raising a family, there was no doctors coming out of medical school that knew anything about cannabis, or, it sort of disappeared. And his friend, World War II vet, smoked weed, and other veterans smoked weed, and they brought weed back with them from Korea, Vietnam, etc. As far as I could tell, that's what got like Andy Weil and Dr. Grinspoon and Dr. McCree and all those guys started. But they then, like with the Fitzhugh-Ludlow Library, they brought back this information and started telling people about books that were printed in the 1800s and whatever, sort of restitching together the timeline and the evidence base. And, from that perspective, I'm just really curious about you and Robert, like, where did you pick up on that? Where did you rediscover, your path of rediscovery? Where did you connect with medical cannabis?
Well, we got into this thing the old-fashioned way, Michael. We got busted, and that was in August of 1975. And it was pretty benign as far as getting busted goes. We were on vacation at the time. The police came and tore apart our house and whatnot, and we had some plants growing on the back sun deck that they confiscated. But we were in a tight little orbit at that time. We had discovered that marijuana helped Robert's eyesight, and he had proved it to himself, and then he proved it to me. And we were just doing everything we could to keep ourselves in marijuana in some way or another. And so that's one reason why we started to grow it. And then after we got arrested, Robert started calling around. He called National Institute on Drug Abuse for some information. He went down to Normal and met Keith Strop, and Keith gave him a file folder. It was the slimmest little file folder you can imagine, labeled medical use marijuana. It had like 3 or 4 articles in it. One of them was about Fred Blanton, who was an ophthalmologist down in South Florida, who was using marijuana to treat some of his patients, and he got in trouble about that. But then we got the the report from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, they were doing an annual report to Congress at that point. I don't know if they're still doing it or not. And it had a whole section on therapeutic uses. It talked about using it in cancer chemotherapy patients, and it had a nice little section about possibly using it for glaucoma. And Robert found that section, and he just about, well, he about fell out of the chair. We thought we were the only ones in the world that knew that marijuana could help glaucoma. We really did. And we were stupid kids, but there it was in black and white, and it nicely gave the names of the researchers and their affiliations. And so Robert started tracking down each of those researchers and calling them up and talking to them. And while he was doing that, we lived only 8 blocks from the Library of Congress at the time. And so I went down to the Library of Congress because I wanted to know why marijuana became illegal. That was the question in my head. And I found myself reading all of this stuff at the Library of Congress. I read some of maybe all of, I can't remember, the hearings with in 1937 with William Woodward, the physician who said, no, please don't make it illegal for medical use, because modern research may reveal new uses for the drug. Well, boy, whew, that's prescient. And so, Robert and I we were a good team. We were kind of on a dual track, and he was finding out stuff that would help him in particular, and I was finding out stuff that that kind of expanded our world in terms of what it was a lot more than fun, and it had a long history, and all of this was new to us, and it was so exciting. It was just so exciting. And so Robert called each of those researchers. I think one of them, there were 3. One of them was doing only animal research, so Robert couldn't go there, but he did go to the other 2 who were doing human research and was tested. And of course that research material became the principal evidence in his trial. So that began our path of rediscovery. And it seems a never-ending path to me. It seems like, I'm always rediscovering something about cannabis. There's always something new. It's wonderful. It's just, it's like the universe. It just keeps going out and going out and going out. It's astonishing. So that's how we rediscovered.
And that was your first evidence-based information that at least put you in a direction that then started you down a path of realizing there really wasn't much information out there, which is, I think, why you also, whose idea was it to start publishing? Was it you or Robert's?
Oh, that was collective, I think. I was working, Robert was doing the marijuana lobbying full time. Somebody had to pay the rent. So I was working with a group called Society for Scholarly Publishing. And at that time, the whole concept of electronic publishing was just emerging. And so I learned how to do, how to create publications from, I can't remember the name of the software, but there were new software packages that were out, and it was very exciting. And so by the time the late 80s came along, we published our first books. I knew all about how to make a book. I knew printers that would print it for us, and it just kind of all nicely came together. And I'm so happy that it was Bob's idea to do the publishing. It was Bob's idea to take the administrative record from the Judge Young hearings, the 1988 DEA administrative law hearings. He knew that if something wasn't done, that would just all end up, molding in files somewhere. And so he thought we should take it and create books. And so we created one book that was all of the testimony, another book that was one book that was the briefs, one book that was the decision from the case, and then we did special book on cannabis, a special book on multiple sclerosis, and like that there, all of which, by the way, are available at Internet Archive. So that's how we got into that. And it was, you know, they didn't sell real well, but they got out there and they got the information to the people who needed it. So
I was wondering, have you seen Frances Young's daughter wrote a letter? She, I guess, out of New Orleans, and I have a copy of it, and it was published in the Times-Picayune, where she chastised the government and the DEA for going against her father's decision, because apparently he died of cancer, and she wonders if he could have used cannabis, and if that hearing may have prevented him from his own access as well, which
wow.
I'll do my best to get a copy of that to you.
Wow, well, thank you. I would love to see that. That's
Because
amazing.
that needs to be part of the archive, because I mean, back in the early 90s, when I was with the Cannabis Action Network going around the country doing rallies in 47 states, we had copies of your books between the glaucoma, the AIDS especially. Were very integral. And when people saw those books, I mean, they would clutch them, I mean, and grab them out of sheer necessity. And it was beautiful and insightful at the same time, because there was no way for them to get this information, and to be able to be the purveyor of this information in such a dark time kind of felt like we were holding up a small little light along the way to keep it going, because your books were so specific to specific medical needs that it registered with so many people who were either family members or those that were dealing with those disabilities or those actions at the time. So what you did rang for generations, and we carried those and we sold them with love, because unfortunately they were not available in a lot of the bookstores and a lot of the regular outlets because of the limited publishing as well as limiting publishing options. It's a shame that none of the larger publishers saw the need or necessity at the time to actually carry that forward. So I just wanted to state that as well.
Well,
Michael Krawitz, you had a follow-up, sir?
Yes, thank you. I feel like this is such a great opportunity, and I really feel like this video is itself kind of a historical record. And in that vein, I'm compelled to say something. Judge Young ruled in our favor. Judge Young ruled that cannabis was safer than potatoes. I mean, there's some great lines from Judge Young. So why did that outcome happen? Well, the DEA appealed the ruling, and the DEA on their website, bless their heart, they said that the courts ruled that marijuana wasn't a medicine, and that's in their documentation, I think, still to this day, which I think we should go after them just for that on the Data Quality Act, protection, because that's a lie. That's not true. What actually happened was the DEA administration appealed the ruling, and the judges that looking at the appeal determined that the DEA administration did not need to follow the ruling of their own administrative law judge. They didn't need to follow the evidence base, that in fact they could rule based on other factors, other considerations. What about the children defense? And that's exactly what they did. So the court's decision was very focused on whether the DEA administration had the authority to overrule their own administrative law judge, which you have to admit is counterintuitive that they would be able to. And it certainly would be seen by me as a loophole in the law. Anyway, you certainly welcome to comment on that, but I wasn't really asking as a question so much as just venting. Thank you for listening.
Well, what that period of time, what really got me was the DEA, the administrator, I think, was John Lawn at that time, and his denial, his statement saying he was not going to follow Judge Young's decision, it was viperish. It was so nasty, and if we're having a scientific debate, it seems we could be honest and polite about it. But I mean, he called us snake oil salesmen. He said that we were pushing some kind of false narrative to the patients at the time, and that it was just so nasty, so nasty. Yeah, Judge Young, he was a fine man. He really was. And he listened carefully. He asked good questions, and he wrote a damn good decision. It's still good reading.
Yeah, it inspired inspired me. It's one of those other reasons why I've continued to do what I do, is to, when you have somebody who, as a law judge, gives such a sound, understanding reason about why the DEA was full of shit, was absolutely breathtaking in its scope, as well as, Mike's more than correct. I mean, arbitrary and capricious. Yeah, he was just, how he actually described how the DEA was handling the situation was probably the greatest verbal dress downs that I have seen in the court. Unfortunately, it never registered with the DEA in any way, shape, or form, but it still holds in the halls of many of us as a hallmark of when, the floodgates should have opened for you medically. And unfortunately, they literally slammed the door shut in your face, which had to be quite disheartening.
Yeah, it was. And it came at a very difficult time, because we were working with an AIDS patient in Texas. This was in 1989, a veteran, by the way. And we were working with Steve to get him legal access to marijuana. And the FDA had signed off on his compassionate IND. The NIDA had signed off on it. And for reasons we could not understand, this was in the fall of 1989, DEA just kept dragging their feet and dragging their feet. And finally, Lon released his rejection of Young's decision like on the last business day of 1989. And when he released that, we understood why DEA had dragged their feet, because they couldn't go and release marijuana to an AIDS patient and then turn around and say, well, Judge Young is full of it, and we are not going to listen to what he says. So there's a perfect example of a patient just being caught in a crossfire of this bureaucratic sham that DEA continues to maintain. I swear the ghost of Harry Anslinger stalks the halls of DEA at night and sprinkles his evil dust everywhere. Some things seem to never change in that agency. It's quite amazing.
How did Robert react to that situation?
Robert was a very even-tempered fellow. He was angry. He was more angry because it made him realize why DEA hadn't released the marijuana to Steve, and Steve was really critically ill. By the time Steve got his marijuana that had been promised to him 4 or 5 months before, he was already in the hospital, in the Audie Murphy VA hospital in San Antonio, Texas. And he got his first batch of federal marijuana in the hospital, and the hospital let him use it. But he only was able to use it for, I think it was about 3 weeks before he died. And so that made Robert very angry that they had used this man as a pawn, essentially, and threw away his life, the quality of his life. So,
thank you for sharing that. I know that's not easy to relive, and it's frustrating as a patient advocate myself to hear that, because unfortunately, we still hear that of veterans trying to get access in hospitals to this day, unfortunately. So yes. We work for the change. Next up will be Council Member Al Byrne with another poignant question. Council Member Byrne, you're recognized.
Alice, good evening. Thank you for coming by. I apologize for the picture, but I got storms here, and I'm afraid if I put a picture on, I'll just go away.
Understood.
I relate really well to what you described as the early chemotherapy treatment, because that's how I first got interested in cannabis back in '67. My father dying of liver cancer was treated with chemotherapy, which was, as you said, I forget your word, but it was pretty barbaric. And it nailed him bad. But I saw at a time that cannabis helped him not survive, but have a better quality of life, you know. And so I, like you and Bob, you know, I knew about glaucoma. Thank you, Bob. I knew about chemotherapy. Thank you, my father. But that's all I knew. And then you guys were working away. You were plowing through the courts and raising hell and doing good stuff. And then Marilyn and I, by serendipity, found out in '83 that, hey, this stuff helps a lot of people. And we had it in writing, and we had thousands of it. And some of the people that we then started to look at really seriously were patients beyond chemotherapy and glaucoma treatment, sickle cell, morning sickness, Crohn's disease, multiple sclerosis, et cetera, et cetera. And some of those people were patients like Kenny Jenks and his wife, who you know well, may not, wonderful lady that helped you and Bob form ACT, docs like Todd. Tell us how that, you're in the middle of this, you've been fighting for Bob, and all of a sudden there's this other conversation coming up. How did that affect you guys?
It was the same conversation. You know, it was, you know, we heard from other people as well. I remember within 6 months of Bob getting his marijuana, somebody with Crohn's disease called us. I had to look that up. I'd never even heard of Crohn's disease. And so, you know, so many people had discovered that marijuana helped them. And like Bob did initially, he just went, oh, no, I must be stoned. This can't be helping me. Jeez, that's crazy. So I know what you're saying, Al. You know, it is like in the early 80s, there was an explosion of different disease categories that started demanding access to it as well. And so, well, I won't say so many, but a few of our friends who made it into the compassionate IND program, Irv Rosenfeld with his pseudo hypothyroidism. I mean, boy, it took me 3 years to learn how to say that. You know, I mean, that's a pretty. You know, and what did George McMahon was? Oh gosh, help me here. Do you remember, Al? Maybe Mary Lynn remembers what George's condition was. Very unusual. George McMahon, and then you know, that all of these folks started to be forward because we have this
nail patella syndrome.
Thank you. Nails patella syndrome. That was George McMahon's condition. And so we wrote these compassionate INDs for folks that were based on all these, not all, but they were kind of unusual diseases. So when we got up to the time of Barbara and Kenny Jenks, which was in the first part of the 1990s, and they both had AIDS. Kenny was a hemophiliac and unwittingly contracted AIDS through his blood transfusions and then passed it on to his wife. This was in the early 1990s, and you know, that the AIDS patients gave us an opportunity to really streamline that compassionate IND process and get it out to AIDS patients. And so many of them started filling out we had a group called the Marijuana AIDS Research Service that sent out these protocols that an AIDS patient and his or her doctor could sit down and in 20 minutes complete a compassionate IND application. And so suddenly the government was getting flooded with these things. And it's interesting, I've just come across some freedom of information requests that we made for that period of time, and reading the discussions within the government. James Mason was the head of the public health service at the time, and he didn't like the idea of AIDS patients getting marijuana at all. And anyway, I digress. All of those people that you named, Al, they were they were fabulous people. Of course, Maynut helped you and Mary Lynn with Patients Out of Time. She was on your board for quite a while, I think. She was a wonderful woman. She lost 2 sons to cancer. The first one, 9-year-old Dana, I think his name was. And then, of course, Keith Nutt, who was 20, I think. I don't even think he was 21. He might have been 20, might have been 23, whatever. But, you know, May helped him and helped get the law passed in Michigan. And nobody would have blamed her after Keith died if she had just gone quietly away. But she didn't. Bless her heart. She would come at the drop of a hat if you had something for her to do, something good for marijuana. And she became known, you know, she was kind of the Brownie Mary of Michigan. You know, she had the Green Cross, and she would go around and deliver marijuana at a time when we didn't have dispensaries, folks. You know, we're not talking about deliveries from a dispensary. We're talking about a nearly 60-year-old woman driving around Michigan delivering illegal marijuana to cancer chemotherapy patients. That's the scenario we've got here. And you know, the police knew what she was doing. She made no secret of it, but she had a heart as big as Texas. She was a wonderful, wonderful person. And, you know, Todd Micarea, we don't talk enough about Todd Micarea. He was such a fine gentleman, and he had a lot of good ideas. He was really before his time. You know, I wish he'd come along maybe just a little bit later, because he had so many good ideas, and then, you know, he's gone too soon. He was, you know, for those who don't know Todd, he was it in the Army that he started getting involved with some marijuana research and found out some interesting things and decided to tell the truth, and another veteran, right? And started to tell the truth, and gee, they didn't like it when he told the truth either. There's a pattern here. So yeah, great people. There was somebody else you mentioned. Who else was in this question?
Dennis Perone.
Yeah, Dennis. You know, Dennis Perone was a good guy. He was very curious. You know, and there's some people. I've heard people say, well, you know, Bob and Dennis didn't get along very well. I don't know that that's true. Bob always liked Dennis. Bob thought he was, you know, a merry prankster kind of guy, which he was. But where Bob digressed with him was in his tactics. And Bob was always, he was rigid about keeping cannabis as medicine and cannabis for fun separate. And he was worried, and I think rightly so, that the cannabis for fun could kind of roll over medical cannabis. And I think we see that happening in some cases. So I think his instincts were right, but we, Dennis, you know, you can't understate what Dennis did. He did an amazing job in getting Prop 215. You know, where would we be without him?
Also a veteran.
Yes, also, there we go.
And yeah,
So-
I agree with you 110%. You know, Dr. Todd was the reason I was involved in cannabis. You know, he made me his first Desert Storm veteran and kind of took me under his wing. And you know, I was fortunate to be at his side in his last days, because he was nothing but an inspiration and definitely gone too soon. And I'm glad to hear you. I can still see him holding a camera and running around and trying to document everything, which was also a part of what he was trying to do. Was he realized and what was happening was quite historical, and he wanted to do what he could to document it so that future generations could understand. So I see this as continuing as on his work as well. So
and his archives are at I think they're at NIH. I think they're in the National Library of Medicine. I'm pretty sure that's correct. His sister arranged for him for those to be deposited there. So they're available, folks. You can get out there and have a look at them.
That is true. All right. Next up. Oh, it's me. I'm going to ask you. Of course, in the early 90s, there was another cannabis activist kind of popped up, but this was more in California. I was wondering if you had crossed paths with Peter McWilliams.
Sort of. We knew about Peter's case, certainly. But I was trying to remember this the other day because I came across an article about Peter, and I just reading his case again, I was just crying at the end of it. They tortured that man, and I couldn't think of any other patient that had endured so much obvious abuse from authorities. Peter McWilliams was an AIDS patient, and he got busted. And there were parts of his story that he's on the West Coast, we're on the East Coast, and we couldn't get all the story straight. So we were not directly involved in his case. But, I think it's fair to say that Peter McWilliams really just got screwed terribly. He got busted, and he was told that if he was caught using any marijuana, they would come and take his home away, which is where his elderly mother was living. And so he was under this tremendous pressure. He was sick. He couldn't use cannabis to feel better. He was on trial. It was a terrible situation, but we did not know him personally. But he should not be forgotten, for sure.
Thank you for that. Next up is Mary Lynn Mathery. Mary Lynn?
Hello. Yep, had to unmute myself. A little slow here. Hello, Alice.
Hey, ML.
You and Bob really are what got us going on this. So obviously we stand on your shoulders. This question about sourcing Robert's medicine, where did you originally source Robert's medicine? You kind of touched on the farm, et cetera. And how would you compare access challenges from then to what patients are seeing today? Now, I did want to add with that, when you describe, in terms of getting his medicine and where, gosh, what was it? It was in like 2001 when George McMahon opened a canister and randomly took out two marijuana cigarettes from the canister. We opened them up. This was at Ethan Russo's house in Montana when he was doing the study of some of the patients. And so he opened them up, and literally we separated out the seeds and stems from the dried leaves and took a picture of it. And it was in his article when he published the research report. It was, and they tried to deny it. It was a later case that Rick Doblin got involved with about, making those claims about the NIDA pot not being very good and having seeds and stems, that they literally had Al do a testimony too, because we all signed something that day, taking the picture, and we all signed something saying that we saw him open it, just to make sure that it was clear. But anyway, if you can compare just the sourcing, how he got it, all the stuff you had to go through for him to get it in that case, and then the different challenges, or compare the challenges to patients today.
So when you say originally sourced, you mean the federal marijuana?
Before federal marijuana.
Yeah.
Okay.
The IMD program.
Okay.
Or that's what I was thinking. Did you?
Okay.
I mean, I knew he did. Actually, you might even want to start at the way beginning. Where did you first get it before you learned to grow it?
Well, I asked because I was speaking to somebody else the other day, and he said, well, before you got the federal marijuana, what kind of cultivar were you using? What kind of cultivar did Bob use in the 1974? And I just, my mind went, we only had two kinds of cultivars in 1974, good or bad. I mean, it was either good pot or bad pot. We don't have all these, the names go on forever. Oh my gosh. So anyway, so let's not talk about those old days. Bob's marijuana did come from the farm. His federal marijuana he received. First of all, he got it through Dr. Merritt at Howard University, when Dr. Merritt was Bob's doctor. And he got it in a little plastic case. It had 15 cigarettes in it. And if somebody out there who hasn't seen one, it looks a lot like a Pall Mall cigarette. It's like an unfiltered cigarette. Initially they didn't want Bob to bring any supplies home. He was supposed to go to Dr. Merritt's office whenever he needed to medicate, and that was just one of the long list of stupid things that the federal government tried to impose on him initially. And then Dr. Merritt left Washington, D.C. To take a new job in North Carolina. And when Bob had to sue the government at that point to regain his access. And when he did that, he made it a part of the settlement that his new doctor, who was Dr. Richard North, would not have to handle the marijuana in any way. Bob felt that was very important. And so the federal government arranged that Bob would go to the Public Health Service pharmacy, which was located in the basement of the, at that time, it was the Health, Education, and Welfare Department, now the Department of Health and Human Services or whatever. So that again, we were still living on Capitol Hill at that point, so it wasn't far from our home. And Bob could go down there and pick up, I think he was picking up a month's supply at a time, but the pharmacists at Public Health Service were taking it out of the canister, which is kind of iconic. Thank you there. Oh, props. I love it. Thank you, Etienne. Robert would get his marijuana.
Hold on. One second. Let me just tee this up. This is the first tin, and I will thank Alice for this. But she explained to me that even though this is the first tin, it had originally come to Robert in the actual bottles, or in I guess a Ziploc bag or something like that, initially, before this tin was the first to arrive, which initially you stated only had 100 cigarettes as opposed to the 300 that the future tins would come. So Alice actually has archives and pieces of history that you can explore by reaching out to Alice O'Leary Randall, I think .com, is it?
Sorry? Yes, it is.
All right.
AliceO'LearyRandall.com. Thank you.
So carry on from the tin.
Yeah, so he would, at the Public Health Service, they would put it in brown prescription bottles. They would take it out of that canister and put it in brown standard prescription bottle with a label on it. And then Public Health Service downsized or something. They closed the pharmacy. Robert arranged for a little pharmacy near our home on Capitol Hill. He got it there for a while, again, still in the little brown bottles. And then, gosh, then it went to Washington Hospital Center. He would pick it up there. And at that point, everybody got tired with the little brown bottles, and they just gave him the tin and sent him on his way. So there were a variety of ways that it arrived, but it was always the same marijuana. Now the potency, I know this will interest people, and they'll get a good giggle from it. The potency ranged between 2.5 and 3.6% THC, which is just laughable in today's atmosphere. But it's, as laughable as it may be, friends, it saved his sight. So, I think we have to keep that in mind. He had to smoke a lot of it. He had to smoke 10 cigarettes a day. And I have thought many a time, what would he be doing in today's market? How would he be controlling his glaucoma at this point? I don't know. He loved to smoke and he loved marijuana. So I think he would be enjoying the dazzling array of possible medications that people can use. And what the second part of the question was challenges, and how would you compare access challenges from then to what patients face today? Apples and oranges. You know, patients today walk in and like they have a whole smorgasbord in front of them of just everything imaginable. I'm just so impressed. I know I say this, I think I say this in every interview I do, but I can't. I want to say it again to the entrepreneurs in the market. God bless you. The variety of products that are available and the quality of products that are available is just so wonderful. And I wish that the government would simply take off their blinders once and look around at the creativity that's being displayed in the cannabis market. And you know, but they're still down there in Mississippi. You know, Mohammed El Soli is still churning out his cannabis and patenting it at the same time, which is more irritating than we have time to go into. So perhaps we should move on.
That was about as polite as I think we can get there. And I appreciate your candor and professionalism there. Because, you know, yeah, I always wonder myself, you know, the history of what was available to even when I was first a dealer, I was selling, you know, quality worse than what Robert was getting from the government. But to know that, I mean, this tin is October 1, 1976.
Yeah, yeah.
So absolutely frustrating to know that, one, I had no idea about medical cannabis, much less this program even existed until I was way into being a medical patient myself. And then I actually went to George McMahon's house and, you know, others, and, you know, learned firsthand, because unfortunately that program was shut down, which had to also be a slap in the face, because here you got the program going, you're seeing people get access, and then to have it arbitrarily, you know, shut down because of, you know, hate is.
Yes, particularly from James Mason, who, you know, Dennis Perone at the time said James Mason was a homophobe, and he absolutely was. I mean, he left the government and went on to work for Evergreen International or something like that, some group in Salt Lake City that tries to take homosexuals and make them straight. I mean, it's appalling what they did. But you know, they hoisted themselves on their own petard, because the outcry in the country has come along so beautifully in terms of learning and understanding the medical uses of cannabis. And you know, you can pull the wool over their eyes once, but you can't do it twice. And the country knew. And so when they shut down the compassionate IND program, wow, the outcry was enormous. And it led directly to the pressure to pass 215. So, and they made the situation 10 times worse. And I'm sure they thought, well, we'll just shut down all those dispensaries and that'll be that. But boy, the genie was out of the bottle, and Americans were too smart to take that bullshit any longer.
Absolutely. And it inspired us and others. And interestingly enough, that creativity you're speaking to and of, a lot of the, you know, I was involved prior to the legalization here in California, and the medicalization, and the diversity that you saw was basically made by patients for other patients, because there was nothing with a dietary need that they had, so they would create the sugar-free option or the honey-based options or others. So it was also medical patients driving the change, but also putting those products forward. Unfortunately, 80% of those were not able to make that leap to the legal market. but that creativity moved on to other states. And, I'm glad to see that it is continuing to be seen. But I think, yeah, I think Robert would be mad to a certain extent too. But that leads us to our next question, which will be from Wade. But wait, before we get to Wade, Mary Lynn had a follow-up. Sorry. Apologies. Mary Lynn?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I just want to say, Alice, that, the story, just going in detail, and let alone the legal case and all that, but then of getting the cannabis, those that you just relayed, that story there, that needs to be in the history. I hope you're doing a real thorough oral history yourself of the life and times back then. I mean, that is fascinating, and it is amazing. And when you said Mason, it reminded me, you're right. There was something publicly, he said something like, the gays are the reason they shut down the IND program was something about gays will have rampant sex. You can't have, I mean, that he literally made that public statement.
Well, he said they were going to go around. These people are dying. He said that they were going to go around with and have sex so that they could get AIDS, so that they could get their medical marijuana, which is about as hateful in a statement, I think, in the day as could be. But his name should be remembered in the archives for his hate, much less his hateful rhetoric, because that's what steered the other politicians into the fear to shut it down, which is disgusting.
Yeah.
Who is an MD, ETN? That guy was an MD. And I will add to your quote, he said all the things you said, except they were going to have sex in the streets, say right in front of your wife and your children. That's crazy. It's crazy shit.
Yep.
Can't help but think he's talking about himself.
Well, with that, I'll turn this over to Councilmember Laughter for our question.
Sorry for that interjection. I couldn't help it. Mary Lynn, I really appreciate the part you're doing here on history, but I want to call on the apparent wise woman I'm looking at and ask you, as a patient myself and as an advocate for your husband and many others you've known, what would you suggest we do to fix the current situation with cannabis and the cannabis movement, particularly vis-a-vis the needs of patients? Yes, there's lots of products available, but they're expensive. Many markets, they're not available, et cetera, et cetera. I'd love to hear your thoughts, if you will, if you're willing to share. Thank you.
Oh, wait, I wish I had thoughts to share. I do. I think we're in a time where tremendous change is coming, and so we've got to stay local with each other. There's so much change, I think, that's going to come, big change, hopefully with some kind of reasonable policy coming out of the Biden administration. But I don't know. I won't be fooled again, as the WHO said. I'll believe it when I see it. But I'm really concerned that it's already happened in Washington State, where they've taken the medical program and they've folded it under the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco, which is absolutely no place for it to be. And that's going to happen in other states because the revenues are down. And why do we have to keep the 3 people that are keeping the medical part going? We can just get rid of them and we'll do all of it over here. That's what worries me more than anything. Because medical use is different. Medical patients have different needs. And so, it's still a fight for us. It really is. It's still a fight for us patients. We have to keep together. And it's that old saying of think globally, but act locally. So, you have to keep writing your Congress people and hopefully you have better Congress people than I do. And, you know, I just, I don't have an answer, Wade. I'm plumb out of answers. I don't. I just don't know where it's going to go right now. But, you know, it's not going to be closed up. It's not, they're not going to shut it down. But I do have concerns that what we're seeing from the federal government is some kind of stall program. First of all, the state programs have been a tremendous boon to the federal government because it's taken the pressure off of them. You know, everyone's all concerned about their states now. Nobody's thinking about, hey, you know, it's the federal government that's screwing us still. You know, what them? We need to look at them. Nobody's looking at the federal government. So the pressure has been off of them, and they're all very focused on these new single molecule cannabinoid-like medicines. And I honestly think their strategy is to just keep stalling things long enough so that they get a few of those on the market. And then they'll start quietly moving towards closing down dispensaries or whatever. I don't know. I worry about that. I do. I don't trust them. They're not to be trusted, not entirely. And so, you know, keep your eyes open, folks. Just, it's not solved yet. It's not solved.
Absolutely. And that's why we're ever vigilant. We're actually, we're in DC just last month working on, you know, still trying to get access for us veterans, which of course, once we get that, it will open up for everybody. So that's why we're going that route, because we have our own unique culture as well as environment, which, since we are a concentrated solution of the American people, we're going to hopefully, you know, work our angle and continue it along the way. So thank you very much, Alice, for absolutely fascinating conversation. I think this is a very historically significant one for our archives, and I hope people will learn from and start looking towards. And as you continue to put these names out, that they are remembered and held in esteem and honor as they should be for, you know, what they gave toward this movement, as well as what you have done and continue to do. So
And
thank you, Alice O'Leary Randall, for joining us tonight for a
say
very
one more thing, Etienne.
absolutely.
Hello. Oh,
Go ahead.
Etienne. Yeah, I'm sending out, I mentioned I'm sending out these info releases, if you will. And if anyone wants to receive them, please just send me an email and I'll put you on the mailing list. I'm Alice O'Leary Randall at gmail.com, all lowercase, no punctuation. And be happy to put you on the mailing list. And so you'll be getting those infomercials or info releases, you know, on a somewhat regular basis. I won't promise anything, but you'll be getting them. So
Well,
thank you for having me, Etienne. I appreciate it very much.
it's an honor again to have you for a second time, but also it's good to see you inspired with your new project. You look very happy, and needless to say, it's always a pleasure to share time. And I want to thank all of our council members, Michael Green, Michael Crowitz, Nate Landau, Mary Lynn Mathry, Al Byrne, Wade Laughter, myself. I'm Etienne Fontaine, and I can't thank you enough. This has been V.A.C. Roundtable number 56, Alice O'Leary Randall and her Project 50. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great rest of your night, and we'll be back in 2 weeks.
All right. Thank you. Good night.
The Veterans Action Council is a Pace Radio Network content provider. You're listening to the Pace Radio Network here at paceradio.net.
The opinions of the individuals during this broadcast are their own, and may not be the opinions of their group or other organizations they may be involved with. All medical advice during our broadcast is not a medical opinion and should be checked with your medical physician.
Enjoy the buzz of legalization with Campbellford Lifestyle Shop. From lights to plant nutrients, books, consumption accessories, and more, we've got all your basics to grow or consume cannabis. Visit our info center or take a look at our piercing services and body jewelry, now available in-store through Campbellford Lifestyle Shop, 17 Bridge Street West, Campbellford.
Limestone City Hydroponics is Kingston, Ontario's hydroponics shop. Take your growing to the next level and create the optimal environment with a tent kit, or maximize your yield with an ebb and flow flood table kit. Either way, Limestone City Hydroponics has more sizes and options to fit your needs. Are you looking for the power of the sun that adapts to your budget? Then look no further, as they have professional grow lighting. They have indoor grow systems that are easy and cost effective, with many options to fit your living space and lifestyle. Cultivate your growing potential. We have everything you need to succeed. And if you can't make it to the store, they offer local delivery to the greater Kingston area. Remember, when you're looking for experts to help you grow, then look no further than the locally owned Limestone City Hydroponics, 105 Sunderland Drive in Kingston, Ontario. Call them at 613-548-0420.
We are people advocating cannabis education here at paceradio.net.